All right. Again, this is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. For those that are on Teams and those on the phone line, I welcome you to the study group. Again, it's a study group, so you're not here to hear any great things that I have to say other than I'm giving you some tips and tricks in how to remember the information before you, so that when you see it again in a different format, that you'll be able to recall the information. So as a study group, I'm not going to be going through page by page and telling you everything on the page. I'll tell you what page I'm on, and I'll tell you what the topic is, and we'll kind of talk about it to make sure you understand. The goal to success on the CDFM exams, and I do not work for ASMC directly, I'm just a person just like you who took the exam. The way the exams are set up, the questions are not directly asked. You'll be given a scenario, and then based on that scenario, you'll be asked a series of questions. So that means when you're studying, you cannot just simply memorize what's on the page and thinking you're going to see it again in that format. If you want to be successful, you got to understand the concepts, the key players involved, the documents, when things happen, what event happens before or after, and so forth. So that is the approach you have to take with the CDFM. All right, so today we'll conclude CDFM Module 3. So we went over fiscal law, which accounts for 31.2% of the Module 3 exam. Finance, we did finance and accounting last week. Finance accounts for 18%, 18.1. Accounting is 25.3%. And today's session, the auditing, even though it's not a large section, it actually accounts for 25.4%, which is about the same as the accounting. So again, the percentages will help you, because I do have people come back and ask me, well, do you know how many questions are in auditing? How many questions? That is not the type of exam that you're going to sit for. So all the ASMC will give you is the percentage. And based on the percentage, you'll know approximately what focus you need, which one you need to focus on more than the others. So like the finance is only 18.1%, I might leave that for last to focus on. So fiscal law, auditing, and accounting accounts for the majority of the questions. Are there any questions of me or the group before we begin with the auditing section? On anything we've covered up to this point, or just CDFM related? All right, I hear no questions. So we'll go ahead and begin. So we'll start on page 3.4.5. Again, today's session is on auditing, which is part of the accounting and finance. So I kind of tie some of the knowledge check and so forth in it. So the first paragraph talks about the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990. So in the study guides, there's several laws that you need to be familiar with. We talked about the 1921 Budget and Accounting Act last week, where it established the requirement for it established the GAO, it established the Office of Management and Budget, and did some other things. So you need to know that one. You also need to know the CFO Act of 1990, because a lot of things came out of it. So those 3 bullets listed there, to name a few. 1, the CFO Act of 1990. Let me turn my volume up here so I can hear you if y'all are talking. And if at any point when I say anything and you have questions, please stop me at that point. Don't let me just ramble on, because it's just going to get more confusing. All right, so the CFO Act of 1990, let's see what it says. It required federal agencies to prepare financial statements that are subject to financial audit. So financial audit. The agencies and department also must establish a chief financial officer, right? Let me see. Federal departments and agencies were to create the position of CFO. Yep, chief financial officer position. And the third thing it did, it created a deputy director in OMB. And then it tells you in the third bullet, the function of the deputy director represents the chief government official responsible for financial management within the executive branch of the government. All right, so let's backtrack. I mentioned the GAO. What does GAO stand for and who do they work for? And anyone could answer if you know it. I'll pause for a few. Anyone on the phone line would like to answer? All right, GAO stands for Government Accountability Office, GAO, and the GAO works directly for Congress. You got your legislative branch, executive, and judicial. You have the GAO works for Congress. Congress also has Congressional Budget Office. Congress has the House and the Senate, and different committees that meet to discuss whether it's programs or appropriations. The executive branch, resource manager or chief financial officer, is Office of Management and Budget, OMB. So when it says here, the new position, Deputy Director for Management, or in the OMB, is the deputy to the Office of Management and Budget, which works for the president or the executive branch. And the third branch of government, judicial, which is your courts, they interpret the laws. So what I'm doing is recapping. If you notice, every session I start the same way. I got to recap what I already know to match the information in front of me, so I know how it all ties together. On the bottom of page 345, it talks about the Financial Improvement and Audit Remediation Program. So in that paragraph, I think it's like close to the second to last sentence, it says the strategic long-term plan devised by the DoD to produce auditable financial statement, which is the purpose that was listed under the CFO Act of 1990, is known as the Financial Improvement and Audit Remediation Program. So the FIAR program. If you have an acronym, make sure you know what the acronym means. Because if you see it again, they might just give you the acronym and give you several deviations of what that acronym can be. When you know what right looks like, it's easy to differentiate from the wrong information. All right, so I think that's all I want to say on that. Fire goal. Auditable financial statements. Next, I will move over to the auditing overview on page 349. It gives you what auditing is, an essential element of public accountability. Because again, when you deal with funds and resources and money, if you don't have your internal controls, if you don't have auditing is an external organization coming in to make sure that you're following the procedures and the policies and the guidance. And then if you don't have those checks in place, then people tend to not do the right thing. So auditing contributes to that accountability of your funding. So federal regulation requires auditing of your programs. Policies and guidance are issued by Congress, GAO, OMB. So you see how page 349, that last sentence, all they give you is acronym. So at this point, you should know what the acronyms stand for. Congress appropriates the money and tells us what we can and cannot do with those funds. The GAO is that external auditing agency that works directly for Congress to monitor how the executive branch, the PresBud, is spent. Because the budget goes submitted from the president or the executive branch to Congress for approval. What does OMB do in the budgeting process? Let's do some check on learning. What is the function of OMB once Congress appropriates the funds. Y'all too quiet for me. This is a study group. Why y'all so quiet? All right, so Office of Management and Budget, they begin the apportionment process. So you got to be familiar with the word. Congress appropriates the funds and OMB apportions funds. So once Congress appropriates, two things happen. The Treasury issues the Treasury warrant because that's tied to Article 1, Section 9 in the law that says no money can be drawn out the Treasury unless you have an appropriation law. So once the appropriation law is in effect, the Treasury issues the notice that says we got the appropriation law, your bank accounts are set up, you can start spending. The second thing that happens once Congress appropriates the funds is OMB begins the apportionment process. How that looks is the agencies such as DOD will submit an SF-132 apportionment document to OMB within 10 days of the appropriation being enacted. Then OMB has 30 days to issue that apportionment. So what I just did was recap what we studied early on in this session and what you will find in Module 1 and Module 2, the funding flow. On page 3, 4, 10, you have the government auditing standards. So for those that were here a few weeks ago, we talked about internal controls, well, a little bit, and we talked about the appropriations. Why are the GAO standards important to us? So kind of recapping a different way of asking the same questions I've been asking. Why are we discussing GAO auditing standards? I'm gonna get somebody to speak. Come on. Why? Because whoever comes in to audit you, they often provide you with a checklist. Let's put it to that level. So is GAO is auditing the executive branch or the rest of us who spend the taxpayers' dollars, it makes sense that the GAO will give you their checklist, their GAO standards. So the GAO standards for auditing is also called the Generally Accepted Government Accounting or Auditing Standards. Let me make sure I say that correctly. Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, the GAGAS, or the GAO Yellow Book. If you've been to my sessions before, you'll hear me talk about the stoplight. A stoplight has a red, a yellow, and a green. There's a GAO red book, a GAO yellow book, and a GAO green book. The GAO red book talks about appropriations, the do's and don'ts, what you can do with the appropriations. As you just learned, the GAO yellow book is auditing. And later on in this, I think at the very end, they kind of give you a little blurb. The GAO green book deals with internal control. So you at least should know those three. Let's just think of a stoplight, red, yellow, green, appropriations, auditing, internal control. So the GAO standards, and we get ready to look at the standards on the next page, which is page 3, 4, 11. Okay, just making sure I didn't have anything else. All right, general standards for audits and engagement. You have auditor independence, auditor professional judgment, auditor competence, they got to be trained, and who checks the checkers, quality control and assurance. So we're going to look at each one. When you're taking an exam and you're studying for an exam, whenever you have a list of things, most likely when you see it again, it's going to say, other than, it'll give you the definition and you got to pick the right one, or it'll say which one is not a GAO standard for auditing. So you'll know the 4 standards, and then when you see that third one that's in the mix, or that other one that's in the mix, you'll know it's not one of them. Independence, professional judgment, competence, and QC, quality control. So the concept of auditor independence on page 11 is simply what it says. Internal control is what you do internally. You have your IC folks, internal control folks, evaluate your processes, your SOPs, your procedures. And auditing is often done by an external organization, external unit. You want that auditor to be independent. They're not counseled by anyone in that organization. They don't get anything for coming in and seeing the good or the bad. They'll give you their best judgment based on what they see. So independence of mind, independence of appearance. And they give you the definition, the state of mind that permits the performance of that audit without being affected by any influences. That's what they're talking about. Independence in appearance. The absence of circumstances that will cause a reasonable party having knowledge of the relevant information to reasonably conclude that the integrity of that person of an audit organization had been compromised. So bottom line, you got to have a person that has no ties to your organization come in with a fresh pair of eyes to do the audit. Auditor independence. Page 3412 talks about threats to auditor independence. So you have several, again, you got a list, so you kind of want to read through them. Self-interest threat, self-review threat, biases, familiarity, undue influence, management participation, we kind of steer them where we want them, or structural threat. Make sure you read through and you understand the differences from one to the other. Think of a matching type scenario. If you have to match and pair them together, you got to be able to do so. So those are the threats. You have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 threats to auditor independence. Any question of me thus far? All right, on page 13, now it talks about professional judgment. You're hoping that your auditors will come professional. It shouldn't just be okay, let's find what you're doing wrong or got me type things. Let's be professional about it. So exercise reasonable care, maintain the highest degree of integrity. So these kind of make sense if you think about it. So it shouldn't be too hard for you to be able to pull out. If they add an extra one in there and say which one doesn't belong, then you should be able to pull it out. But let me see. Carefully define the scope of work. You want to make sure the individuals know exactly what you're coming in to evaluate. Exercise professional skepticism and not be satisfied with less than persuasive evidence. Obtain reasonable, not absolute, because nothing is absolute, nothing is perfect. So that's why you talk about reasonable assurance at the end when we talk about the reporting. So professional judgment. Page 14. This section should be easier for y'all, but don't overlook it because, again, it accounts for over 25% of the exam. So don't overlook some of these tedious information. Auditor competence. The folks that come into audit must also maintain a certain level of professionalism. So he talks about in the second paragraph, they must complete 80 hours of continuing professional education every 2 years, and within a minimum of 20 hours being completed in any 1 year. So you will have this same requirement when you become CDFM certified. Whenever you're CDFM certified, then you have to complete CPEs every 2 years, and within a 1 year, at least 20 hours must be in that 1 year period. And as stated, for the auditors, they go a little extra step it says at least 24 of the 80 hours must be related to auditing the government environment or the specific environment in which the audited entity operates. So paragraph number 2 is what's more important for page 3417, because it's got most of the information there. So audit organizations are responsible for making sure that their folks are trained, is what it's saying in the 3rd paragraph. And when a person comes into audit, they should have a working knowledge of what it is that you do. Because again, if they have no idea how things operate and work, how can you come in and audit? You probably won't know exactly what to look for. So that's the 3rd one. The next is page 15, 3415 talks about quality control and assurance. So you have auditing organization, but they also have to have external reviews. The standard has 2 components. First, the audit organization must establish a system to provide reasonable assurance that the audit organization and its personnel, that means they're trained, they're professional to do that audit, and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. The 2nd paragraph, audit organization performing audits and attestation engagements in accordance with the generally accepted government auditing standards must have an external peer review. And how often must they have this peer review? In that last paragraph, if you read through it, it'll say every 3 years. When you're studying, like me, I buy the book. If you could, some people can do the digital thing. I can't. I need my book so I can write the important notes. As you're going through the study guide, as I'm pointing out key things, get your pen or paper and write down some notes. You'll remember it better that way. Do not simply highlight with these bright colors, beautiful colors. Anybody tell you I love colors, but when you're studying for this exam, it works better if for that particular topic, you write down what's important. Because the next time you come through the material, you'll focus on the notes that you wrote around the borders of the page and not everything on the page. Does everyone understand where I'm coming from with that? All right, so I just used the word, let's see. On page 15 says attestation engagement. Now, is there anyone on the call or the phone line who's have any experiences with what we call an attestation engagement? Because you're going to see it on page 16. So let's address it. So think of an attestation engagement. So you have your regular financial audit on page 16. You have performance audit, but you also have a 3rd one, which is called attestation engagement. Typically for the other 2, management, you have no say-so in what they come in and look. They tell you they're coming, whoever your hire is. They might send you the checklist ahead of time, and you prepare yourself for that exam. The attestation engagement, let me read my definition, is an arrangement that you make. So you want someone to come in, they have no ties to your organization, you have a senior agency that you want to come in and audit certain areas within your organization. So that is what an attestation engagement is. The difference is management communicates with the auditor and tell them what area they want them to inspect. So I just wanted to separate the 2 there. On page 17, GAO reporting standards for audits and attestation engagement begins. Okay, so let me see if there's anything. It references again, financial audit standards must be in compliance with the GA, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP. For attestation engagement, the reporting standards vary. So this is more straightforward information. Attestation engagement, the yellow book incorporates the 4 reporting standards from AICP, and I think we're going to look at those later. So here they just mentioned the yellow book, but you got to remember red, yellow, green, appropriation, auditing, internal control. So yellow book, they're talking about auditing, but that's the section we're in. All right, so for auditing purposes on page 18, it is letting you know at the DOD level, you have the DOD IG. Whenever we get guidance from the DOD, it's often written on a DOD instruction document, DOD. So in case that comes up a little bit later. All right, so he provides leadership, supervises, monitors what an inspector general does. Page 19, a lot of this information, if you notice, is repetitive. Page 19, it's telling you that the auditing groups, you have the DODIG we just talked about. The Army has an Army Audit Agency. The Navy and the Air Force both have audit organization. So those are the 4 DOD-related audit organizations. You got a list of things. So now you know they're DODIG, Army, Navy, Air Force auditing agencies. And I want to point out on page 19, because this one comes up quite often, and I want you to see it in writing, the leader or the person in charge of the GAO, their title is Comptroller General. So whenever you see CG in the CDFM study guide, it is Comptroller General. Comptroller General is the person in charge of the GAO. And it says the individual receives a 15-year appointment. So they're there in that position for a very long time. All right, so I'm gonna put that here, CG, Comptroller General in charge of GAO. All right, let's go to page 21, types of audit. So all federal audits are initiated and conducted by legislative authority or in response to some congressional request, generally defined as financial, performance, and attestation engagements. You got 3 types. We talked about so remember earlier we talked about Army, Navy, Air Force, and the DODIG as being the 4 auditing organizations. And oh, by the way, they throw this one in here. The Defense Contract Audit Agency is another audit organization within the Department of Defense. So why is it separated from the others? I don't know. So just make sure you understand. So there's really 5. DODIG, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Defense Contract Audit Agency. So that's number 5. So how many types of audits do we have? All right, nobody wants to talk to me today. What's going on? We have 3 types of audits: financial, performance, and attestation engagement. Financial, they're looking over the GFIBS report or the statements, the financial statement, your accounting ledgers. Performance and how you operate your business. Attestation engagement, management works with the auditors and tells them what areas to come in and evaluate. Page 3423 lets us know that auditors can perform additional duties other than audits. And they gave some examples, which is listed at the bottom of page 23. Develop methods and approaches in evaluating a proposed program, forecast potential program outcomes under various assumptions, and perform investigative work. So those are 3 additional duties that an auditor may perform. We start talking about auditing plan. Of course, before they come in to do an audit, before you do an audit, you got to plan for it. What are we going to look at? There's too much stuff to look at, so we have to kind of tailor our audits. So on page 25, it goes into the phases of a government audit. Plan, review, report in an actual audit. So in the planning stages, you're just determining what is our objective? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to determine in this? What is the scope? Because again, we got too much things to look at, so we need to be able to tailor it for a specific cause. So your planning stage is what's all that is determined. Define the audit scope, objectives, how are we going to do it, methodology to achieve the goal. Review is when we actually go out to gather our evidence. And then reporting is preparing that written report to say what our findings are, and also recommendations. So audit review on page 26, the last paragraph, the standards require that auditors document the evidence they gather in the audit documentation, formerly called working papers. And the reason you want to know if the name changes, because there's no telling how the exams are written. Do they use the old term or the new term? Because the exams do not keep up with the study guides. So it's not like they come up with new study guide and they change the test at the same time. So understand that's why you need to know what the old name was and what the new name is. So if you see it again, you'll know, okay, they're still talking about the auditor standards. Reporting on page 27, audit report phase, phase 3. In an audit report, you have several types of opinions. Why they didn't just say best, better, or whatever. It goes unmodified, which is your best one. Modified, meaning you had some issues. Disclaimer, unable to render an opinion, or adverse. Material misstatement of fact and failure to follow. So I don't know how many people claim adverse, because it means you haven't done anything to follow the accounting standards. The concept of audit finding. Auditors often tend to use the word findings to identify the result of what they found, which is usually dealing with performance audit. So in the GAO Yellow Book, advocates that the same concept be used in financial audit. So it's kind of like the who, what, why, where, when type of concept. Condition, criteria, effect, and cause. And I want to point out something to you, because if you notice, because somebody came back and like, hey, I did this practice test and it says there are actually 5 phases of an audit. So you have the traditional, the plan, let's see, actually 4 phases. You have plan, review, and report. And report is just stating you, this is what we found. But if you notice that little on page 28, that second to last little paragraph or sentence, an auditor's recommendation is often considered a 5th element. So you have little intricate pieces of it. So I got to figure out what's the 4th. Unmodified, modified, disclaimer, adverse, and auditor's recommendation. The auditor's recommendation should address the cause. So I'm gonna pin that. Potential benefits. On an audit, that's what you're trying to do. How can we save time, increase our accountability? Page 3429, audit reports. It's either going to be a monetary benefit or a non-monetary benefit. So let's see if they give any examples. Monetary benefits are those expressed in financial terms. We can cut costs, we can save money over here because we are not doing this particular function anymore, or non-monetary. So non-monetary it gives you some examples. Increase the security, the safety, or accuracy rate is higher because of whatever actions we're taking. So just make sure you understand and you have the two types of benefit are monetary or non-monetary, and that you understand the examples of what a non-monetary is. Easy for monetary because it got a dollar amount, but what are some types of non-monetary benefits? And they give you a list on page 29. Examples. All right, let's see. And finally, on page 30, audit review of internal control. So if you notice, this was the only page where they talked about internal control. And actually, I think in the study guide, this is the only page where I've seen internal control used. And the very last series of sentences or paragraph. When evaluating internal control, apply the GAO standards for internal control in the federal government, also called the Green Book. So going back to what I stated earlier, auditing was yellow and internal control is found in the Green Book. Just remember a stoplight. And it also refers you a summary of those standards are to be found in module 1.3 in your enterprise risk management and internal controls section. Whenever they reference something else, because they're telling you to go there and read it, that means you need to go there and review it. Because ideally, you might see that information again on your module 3 exam for information that's in the module 1, because everything overlaps at some point or the other. All right, that looks like that's the end of the auditing. Like I said, it's quick, straightforward. There's no calculations you have to do. So the next couple of weeks, I'll be kind of just doing some different reviews. So if you do come, those reviews are typically me asking you questions. I'm just throwing questions out there, scenarios, trying to get you to think and looking at things from different angles. Because again, I don't see the exams. I don't know what's on the exams, I've done it, so I know how the types of questions or how you will see the questions. So my goal is to let you ask you a series of questions from different angles, but it's really asking the same question, if that makes sense. All right, well, that's all I have for today. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know, and we can go ahead and respond to those questions now. If not, I'll see you guys next week for those who stop by for the review number 1 on CDFM Module 3. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group. I'll see you guys again next time. Thank you all for stopping by.